Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. 2 bodies in suitcases, hacked apart and dumped. But was it greed or revenge? Find out on Murder Mile. Today I'm standing on Scott's Road in Shepherd's Bush, W12. 4 roads west of the last killing by the shoebox killer. 2 roads south of the paedophile known as the Beast. 1 road south of the Prince of Shepherd's Bush. And 2 streets east of the raging widow's fury. Coming soon to Murder Mile. The eastern side of Scott's Road comprises of a cul-de-sac surrounded by garages, council flats, and a line of red brick townhouses, with a garage on the ground floor, a kitchen and living space above, and 2 bedrooms and a bathroom at the top. From the outside, number 13 looks like any other house, with a car on the drive, bins out for rubbish, cactuses in the window, and its black curtains closed. It's as if Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote have finally kissed, made up, got a room, and are making sweet whoopee. But as innocent as this house may seem, even before this brutal double murder, it was a place of secrets. Where rough sex was as commonplace as a nighttime cup of cocoa, where extreme porn was like watching EastEnders, and sadistic and racist roleplay was as ordinary as a good book at bedtime. It all came to a head on Monday the 8th of July 2024, when the owners, Paul Longworth and Albert Alfonso, were brutally butchered by Albert's new live-in lover. But what drove him to kill? Was it money or malice? My name is Michael. I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 307. The Shepherd's Bush Suitcase Murders. To everyone who knew them, 71-year-old Paul Longworth, formerly of Ireland, and 63-year-old Albert Alfonso, originally from France, were an ordinary couple enjoying their loving but uneventful romance in the latter part of their lives. Having entered a civil partnership in February 2023, this marked their commitment to each other, but they'd actually been living as a couple for more than a decade. Back in 2013, they'd moved into this 3-storey townhouse at 13 Scott's Road, just off Goldhawk Road. And according to the neighbours, Albert and Paul were lovely guys, both really friendly, polite, and smiled a lot. They were a very nice couple and were genuinely very fond of each other. And even though 1 year after they tied the knot, they had separated, they still lived together as soulmates. Together they were inseparable. But what drove them so close was what drove them apart, being such different personalities. Paul was quiet, calm and passive. A sweet soul who many said wouldn't harm a fly. And as a self-employed handyman who was enjoying a well-earned retirement, he hadn't packed away his tool belt, his hammers, his drills and his power saws, as he still loved to fix things and could build anything. As the younger and fitter of the two, Albert was a swimming instructor at the Mode Club in nearby Acton. And although just weeks before his murder, he told the barman at the Shepherd and Flock pub near to his flat, "I'm retiring soon." He wasn't planning to slow down, as this was an opportunity to make the most of a new stage in his life, with more travelling, more people, and more anonymous sex. Whereas Paul enjoyed the emotional side of being a couple, like kissing, cuddling, meals, and romantic walks in the park, Albert had a predilection for rough sex and roleplay. So although having split, they slept in separate bedrooms in the same house, they were always close and loving, just not in a sexual way. In his bedroom on the top floor of 13 Scott's Road, sat naked at his laptop in front of his webcam, Albert got his thrills by tugging one off in front of internet porn, uploading videos of himself having sex, and also paying others to fulfill his fantasies for a fee. It was all very harmless, consensual, and anonymous. In 2012, on an online forum, Albert, under an unnamed alias, began chatting to a man he knew only as I Am Black Master and Mr. Dick 20 centimeters, paying him to film himself masturbating and performing sex acts on other men, which he uploaded to porn sites like StripChat, Camfinder, Xgaze, and Xhamster. For a decade, they only knew each other virtually until Albert decided to make his fantasy a reality. In 2022, after the COVID lockdowns, Albert met him for the very first time. 2 years later, I Am Black Master brutally butchered both Albert and Paul. I Am Black Master's real name was Yostin Andreas Mosquera, a slim and muscular 34-year-old Colombian from Medellin. Initially, their relationship was transactional, when in 2022, Albert flew 5,000 miles to pay Yostin $80 a time to perform sex acts. But it soon blossomed into a friendship, and maybe more. In March 2024, Albert and Paul holidayed in the exclusive Hotel Isla del Encanto, which translates as the Island of Enchantment. A luxury all-inclusive resort nestled in the Isla Barru near Cartagena. Accessed only by a chauffeur-driven speedboat, this 5-star hotel on a tropical island had its own private beach, pools, maid service, restaurants, sauna, and it cost per night as much as most Colombians earn in a month. For Albert and Paul, this was a regular holiday as they loved living the high life. But for Yostin, although he was now a friend, and some might say a lover, this was a life he could only experience in his dreams. So at the end of the week of extravagance, as Albert and Paul packed their summer clothes into a large silver trunk, all battered and tatty, with an address label in case it got lost, as Yostin went back to his old life as a broken, struggling, self-proclaimed porn star, it must have seemed like a blessing when Albert and possibly Paul paid for him to fly to London and to stay in their Shepherd's Bush home. In October 2023, and later in June 2024, Yostin arrived in Heathrow, carting a battered maroon hard-shell suitcase containing his meager belongings. And although Albert made him feel welcome by taking him sightseeing, giving him a guest membership at the club, signing him up to the five-a-side football team, and even paying him to learn English at Ealing College, being on a 3-month tourist visa, he knew he couldn't stay forever. And although his board and lodging was free, not everything was free. In court, Yostin told the jury,
"I continued the sex with him, as Albert said he'd pay."
But he didn't. His travel was paid, as was his bed, food and clothes, as well as an air fryer which was given to his mother. That was his defense, but with Albert dead, it's hard to contest it. During his trip, Yostin also met a young black man from an equally disadvantaged background, known only by the alias of James Smith, who stated,
"They seem to enjoy each other's company."
But when James intuitively asked Yostin,
"Are you gay or straight?"
he stated that as a man with a wife and child back home in Colombia,
"I'm just doing it for the money."
Something that James understood, agreeing,
"Great, so am I."
It began as a series of anonymous sex acts via webcam, using aliases and avatars. But where there's secrets and lies, there is also deception and darkness. James Smith stated he first met Albert Alfonso back in 2005, nearly 20 years before. In court, he alleged that when he was 17 or 18, so still technically a child, he'd gone to Albert's flat for drinks after a rugby match. The next morning, having awoken with a banging headache, James recalled,
I said to him, "What happened?"
And on his camera,
Albert showed a video of me on all fours, and he was penetrating me from behind.
all while James was unconscious. Cross-examined in court, the defense barrister asked,
"Does it cross your mind that you were raped?"
James replied,
"Now, yes." "Does it cross your mind that your drink may have been spiked?" "Now, yes." "And that you were groomed by Albert Alfonso?" "Now, yes."
He was young and innocent.
"I didn't know what to do. I was mortified. I didn't know my sexuality. I was confused and scared. And being a black boy in London, gay, whether drunk or not, it didn't matter."
He said Alfred assured him,
"I won't show it to anyone, but in return you have to do favours for me."
Being vulnerable, broke and coerced by an older man with money, James stated that Alfred would pay him £150 for sex, and over time,
It became routine and consensual.
to the point that, when James needed money, although he'd been raped by Albert, sometimes he initiated the contact. To many this may seem strange, that a victim of serious sexual assault would willingly maintain a relationship with their abuser, and even request more sex. But it's a complicated form of manipulation and violence, where James would be treated like a friend, a lover, and a sex object. Yostin claimed he was also a victim of Albert's abuse. But was this a truth, or a second-hand alibi? At the trial for Paul and Albert's double murder, Yostin stated,
Albert would instruct me to do things, sexual things. He told me, use my imagination. But he was the one telling me what to do.
In these sex acts, he claimed,
I never enjoyed,
but continued to do it for the money that he said he never received. Albert's kink was black domination fantasies. Being abused and dominated by a black slave master, and being subjected to degrading and humiliating acts as his white submissive. It was role-play with costumes and characters, but it wasn't the kind of kinky little pantomime that a bored couple may engage in to liven up a dull love life. This was rough and violent sex where Albert was tied up, beaten, hurt, violated anally with a large strap-on penis. And although he thrashed and moaned in pain as the Black Master beat and degraded him by urinating, vomiting, and even defecating on him, it was all at his own request. Yet Yostin claimed there was truth in this fantasy, as in their ordinary life, Albert allegedly racially abused him, made him feel small and empty, forced him to sleep on the floor, denied him friends, and took his keys away whenever he left the flat. Of course, with Albert and Paul being dead, no one can disprove this. The last time James saw the couple alive was on Friday the 5th of July 2024, 3 days before the murder. In one of the bedrooms, James, Yostin and Albert were having a three-way sex session. It was casual, ordinary and consenting. James stated,
After the session, Paul came and sat with us and we talked. He gave me a big hug. That was the last I heard of those two.
with their deaths coming as a great shock to him. But the evidence suggests that this was all premeditated by Yostin. He began researching the killings at the end of June, just weeks after his arrival in the United Kingdom. He searched the internet for serial killers of London, how to dispose of a body, and the best ways to poison. Oddly, all blogs written by myself. But this could simply have been an internet search of a true crime fan. Yet the next search he made was more damning. It was said that not only had he researched the value of their home in Scots Road, but he also copied a PowerPoint document containing Paul and Albert's bank logins and passwords. They weren't rich, but compared to this impoverished Colombian, they were as good as millionaires. Monday the 8th of July 2024 saw the start of a heatwave of 32 degrees, which would last the week. And as a city which grinds to a halt the second the sun peeps out from behind its usual grey gloom. When it gets hot, it gets very hot. And in a concrete and glass jungle like Shepherd's Bush, everything is too hot to touch. That morning, being sat in Albert's top floor bedroom, Yostin made several internet searches in Spanish. Where on a head is a knock fatal, and how much damage a blow to the head would cause. As although he pleaded self-defense, for the prosecution,
He murdered both men. He intended to kill them. His actions were planned and premeditated, and he immediately set about trying to steal from them.
between 12:30 p.m. and 1 p.m, neighbours in the council flats opposite saw the black curtains at 13 Scots Road being drawn. But being at the height of a blisteringly hot day, it didn't seem strange. Albert was at work, finishing his final days as a swimming instructor. So inside, Paul and Yostin had been left alone. But as an obstacle to his money, it's likely he was in the way. Sometime later, as Paul entered the bathroom, from behind, Yostin smashed him over the head with his own hammer and shattered the back of his skull with 9 frenzied blows. If he'd hated him, he would have mutilated him, but he didn't. In fact, his killing was so fast, the 71-year-old only had a few defensive wounds to his hands. And having shoved the body under the bed, Yostin wiped up with a towel and locked the bedroom door. He was killed as fast as he was forgotten. Yet in court, Yostin claimed that he himself was neither the culprit nor the target, stating,
I heard them pushing each other in the bathroom. Albert always had problems with Paul.
even though everyone agreed that although their lives were unconventional, they loved each other. He also claimed that Albert had threatened him, stating,
If you tell anyone, something bad will happen to your family.
But again, with them dead, this can't be disputed. At around dusk, possibly having stopped off at his favourite pub for a pint, Albert returned home. It's uncertain how Paul's disappearance or his locked bedroom door was explained. But at around 10 p.m, Yostin claimed that Albert needed sex, as he did at least 4 times a day, so they headed to his bedroom. He had a double bed, fitted with plastic sheets to wipe clean any body fluids which ejected from any and every orifice, as this dominant black master humiliated his submissive white slave. Around the bed to capture Albert's sexual degradation, as always, Yostin set up 4 cameras. A webcam on the desk, one at the foot of the bed, one on the bedside table, and a tablet attached to the ceiling fan, with the explicit footage to be edited later and uploaded to a wealth of S&M and hardcore porn sites. For anyone else, this would have seemed creepy and sinister, but for Yostin and Albert, this was just sex. With the blinking red eye of each camera flashing like jackals winking, their consensual sadism began. Both men were naked, except for Albert wearing a swimming cap and a black leather eye mask, as Yostin, the Black Master, urinated on his subordinate, his foul waste product somehow arousing him. Their sex was all about pain and danger, as the Black Master took his white slave to and beyond his threshold, strapping his backside with bondage tape, painfully cutting it away with a sharp knife, and having taken poppers, amyl nitrate, to get high and relax his sphincter, Yostin penetrated him with a large strap-on dildo. Again, this was a normal night in for Albert, so the pain he felt prior to his death didn't scare him. But so horrific was his murder that the jurors were only given the video's audio for fear that the images may traumatize them. At roughly 10:15 p.m, with Albert on all fours and facing away, having waited for the right moment, detectives stated,
He took hold of Albert's chin with his left hand,
as if he was caressing it,
pulls his head back, and with his right hand stabbed him in the neck, deliberately and precisely,
as blood spurted from his carotid artery. Mocking him, Yostin is heard on the audio saying,
"You likey?"
And as Albert struggles to get up, with blood pouring down his chest, as Yostin holds him in a headlock, Yostin repeatedly plunges an 8-inch knife deep into Albert's face, neck, and chest, 13 times, repeating,
"You likey, you likey, you likey."
No one acknowledged his cries. As the room was soundproofed for sex, Paul was long since dead, and as Yostin pulled him back onto the bed, from ear to ear, he slit Albert's throat. Only his death wasn't mercifully swift, but painfully slow. On the video, forensics stated,
He is heard struggling to breathe, and then his body goes limp.
Only Yostin doesn't stop to acknowledge his crime as a river of blood spews from his neck, but instead places Albert's slowly dying body on a plastic sheet, and in Spanish, bursts into song and starts to dance. Put aside his alibi of self-defense. By these actions alone, his motive is clear, and his goal was money. With Albert's body barely alive and still twitching at his feet, without a single ounce of compassion, Yostin opened the spreadsheet, searched for the cost of houses in his hometown of Medellin, and even though he had the logins and passwords for Paul and Albert's accounts at Barclays, Halifax, NatWest, MoneyGram and PayPal, somehow he failed to send £4,000, 21.5 million pesos, to his own bank account in Colombia. Undeterred, after a shower and a change of clothes, having left 2 bodies brutally massacred in both bedrooms, although he would claim,
"I didn't steal the money, I was owed it."
At 10:50 p.m, barely 30 minutes after Albert's murder, he tried to drain the accounts dry at the Sainsbury's cash machine on Goldhawk Road. But with the system sensing that something was amiss, all of the cards were declined and frozen. We know this because Yostin thought he had switched off the webcam, but he hadn't. He didn't destroy the video files, no one knows why. And as he wasn't entitled to claim the house, any life insurance, or the contents of both men's wills, the webcam captured him counting the haul from both killings. Just £900. The cleanup and disposal of the bodies was as badly planned and pathetic as the killings themselves. The next morning, using Albert's phone, in bad English, he texted,
"Flying to Costa Rica, family problem, back in 8 weeks."
Which of course raised suspicions. At 1:19 p.m, CCTV on the flats at Scott's Court opposite caught him in the bedroom window wearing white overalls. He left, returned at 2:09 p.m. with a large maroon suitcase, and later that evening, the neighbours heard the sounds of power tools being used. In the bathroom, he decapitated both bodies, severing the heads at the neck and the legs at the hips with an electric saw, so each body was split into 3 pieces: a head, a torso with arms, and legs with feet. But even with the maroon suitcase and Paul and Albert's large silver trunk, being too small to carry both bodies in one go, that same day, Yostin went on Facebook Marketplace and ordered a chest freezer. Again, seen on CCTV, it was delivered that day by an unsuspecting man in a van who was paid in cash. The next day, on Wednesday the 10th of July, he separated the body parts. In the silver trunk was the torso, arms and legs of Paul Longworth, still wearing a black Giorgio Armani t-shirt with a white towel and a Marks & Spencer's blanket to soak up the ooze. But oddly, no plastic sheeting to trap the smell or stop the flies from feeding on his rotting meat in this mini heatwave. And in the large maroon suitcase was Albert's torso, arms and legs, wrapped in nothing but a beach towel of Arsenal Football Club. So what was left behind in the chest freezer? Just their heads, with Albert still wearing the swimming cap and black leather eye mask. And although the night was incredibly warm, he didn't switch on the freezer. After a pitiful attempt at destroying the evidence, in which he mopped up using a kettle and towels, but left blood everywhere, tossed the sex toys, the strap-on, the bloodied knife and their phones into the communal bin, even though bin day had passed, and bafflingly left the hammer and the white overalls in a Sainsbury's carrier bag with a receipt for his recent purchases. To celebrate his good fortune, he spent part of that £900 at the Central Bar on Shepherd's Bush Green, as seen on CCTV. But what did he plan to do with the bodies? Bury them? Burn them? No. He decided to throw the cases off a bridge into a river. And even though the nearest river was the River Thames at Hammersmith Bridge, which was barely a mile away and close to traffic but not pedestrians, not being British, he googled Tall Bridge, England, and decided on the Clifton Suspension Bridge, 114 miles east in Bristol. The problem was he couldn't drive. So again, googling it, he hired Julia Romero, an unsuspecting man in another van, to take him and these two suspiciously heavy suitcases on a 2.5-hour journey, costing almost £200 of his £900 score. And then at Bristol, he had to hire another taxi to take him out to Clifton. Of all the nights to dispose of a body, a weekday would have been the quietest. But being surrounded by pubs and with England playing the Netherlands in the Euro 2024 semi-final, by the time he arrived at 10:50 p.m, pubs were kicking out, and for no known reason, he had the taxi drop him a quarter of a mile from the bridge. Outside of the Mall pub on Gloucester Road, as Yostin wrestled the two 10-stone cases from the back of the blue taxi, Mr. and Mrs. Malone, two tourists from Florida, joked,
"Hey, what's in those cases? Bodies?"
Not knowing the truth, as Yostin dragged the cases towards the bridge. But with one of the handles broken and two busted wheels having buckled under the weight, that 5-minute walk took almost half an hour. At 11:20 p.m, he tried to throw the cases off the 250-foot-high bridge into the gorge below, but couldn't lift them over the barriers. And even if he could, there were safety nets below to stop suicide jumpers. Realizing he had left incriminating drag marks on the pavement, he tried to wash it away by urinating on it, which alerted two maintenance staff and then a cyclist who spotted a red liquid oozing from one of the cases. With the ploy that the cases were full of car parts and that the leak must be engine oil not working, Yostin dumped both cases and fled to nearby Leigh Woods, where he hid in the bushes. At 12:07 a.m, the police arrived, opened the cases to see two bodies, and although he had destroyed their IDs, on the silver trunk he'd left a label from their holiday in Colombia, which was complete with their names and home address. At 4:30 a.m, police smashed down the door of 13 Scots Road and found a crime scene and their heads. On Friday the 12th of July, having named him and distributed his description, at 2:15 a.m. the next morning, he was arrested while sitting on a bench at Bristol Templemead Station, wearing a t-shirt still stained with Alfred's blood, and he was minus a shoe. He was charged with double murder and committed for trial. held at Belmarsh Prison. The trial began in April 2025 at the Old Bailey. Yostin Mosquera pleaded not guilty to both murders, claiming that Paul Longworth was killed by Albert Alfonso, and pleading guilty to Albert's manslaughter, but owing to a loss of control, which the prosecution rejected. With a wealth of evidence against him, being the knife, the CCTV, the bodies, the suitcases, and the video of the sex and the murder itself, a conviction seemed almost certain. But with an issue over the timings of when each internet search was made, for the sake of a fair trial, on the 15th of May 2025, the jury was discharged. A retrial began on the 30th of June 2025 at Woolwich Crown Court, with Yostin's defence being that he was forced to commit each sex act against his own will, that Albert had threatened his family, that he had only killed in self-defence, and that although he said, "I felt very sad and wanted to leave," he remained close and friendly with Albert, who he claimed raped me every day, although no evidence of this exists. On the 21st of July 2025, 35-year-old Yostin Andreas Mosquera was found guilty of the murders of Paul Longworth and Albert Alfonso. His sentencing has been delayed until the 24th of October, as the judge ordered him to be psychiatrically assessed. And as he wasn't a British citizen, but a Colombian national, once he has served his sentence, it's likely he'll be deported back to his home country. Often, we never really know what goes on behind our neighbours' doors. Even with the grisly webcam recording of Albert's murder, what went on at 13 Scots Road will never truly be known.